would oblige all sides to perhaps pause and take stock, have their answer. 10 days on, the bloodshed continues in eastern Ukraine, even hampering investigators' access to the crash site. The U.S. claims missiles are being launched from the Russian side of the border. The EU is getting set to tighten sanctions. And Vladimir Putin is reportedly refusing to take the calls of the German chancellor. True, his foreign minister, who denies Moscow's hand in the fighting, now suggests international monitors come and patrol the border between Russia and Ukraine. Is it a serious offer? And how will the Kremlin react to more sanctions? More broadly, is, as some have put it, Europe sleepwalking into something ominous on this 100 years to the day that the Austro-Hungarian Empire declared war on Serbia, inadvertently, at the time, setting the wheels in motion for World War I. Today, in the France 24 debate, we're asking the question of whether or not it is too late for sanctions. With us, he teaches at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po, Tornika Gordadze, the former Georgian Minister of European Affairs. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks as well to Mathieu Bouleg, Eurasia Project Manager at risk consultants AISMA. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Journalist Catherine Field, welcome back to the France 24 debate.
Good evening.
And we welcome from Washington, James Kirchick, fellow at the Foreign Policy Initiative. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation, and you have on Facebook and Twitter our hashtag F24debate. Let's start with the latest from eastern Ukraine, a crash site that's partially become a front line. For the second day running, Dutch investigators unable to get to the area where flight MH17 went down, with one separatist leader admitting government forces had taken part of the zone. And while the West squarely backs Kiev, fighting at an investigation site can only dim the truth.
We will be seeking assurances that any military action does not compromise our humanitarian mission, and also that they abide by the terms of the UN Security Council resolution that sought a ceasefire. We understand that yesterday there was fighting within the exclusion zone, and so we need a reassurance that the exclusion zone will remain and that there will be a ceasefire so that we can carry out our work.
Catherine Field, the Australian Foreign Minister, and Australia losing 28 of its citizens in that shooting down of that plane, she seems to be putting the onus there on Kiev, not on the rebels.
She's putting the onus on whoever she can at the moment, because the Australian Prime Minister has really taken the lead on this. He's promised his citizens that he's going to act. Now, Australia is in a position where it really can act without having to, if you like, be restrained by other neighbours, by other business partners. It has also got the G20 summit coming up later this year, and the Australian Prime Minister, don't forget, has also said there's a big question mark about whether Vladimir Putin should be invited to that, whether or not he should be welcomed. Now, the Australians have got form when it comes to the Russians. They do stand up, and it's actually been quite, how should we say, pleasing to see a Prime Minister stand up and say, this is a step too far. We are going to send our police to Ukraine and find out what happened.
It's true that Tony Abbott has been extremely outspoken since the start of this. Mathieu Bouleg, do you sometimes wish that Europe's leaders could speak so openly?
Well, that'd be a good thing, but I reckon it's good to bring some new blood into the equation. And as far as stemming from Australia, it's kind of interesting to see some fresh faces and to see some fresh impulse to try and change the situation. The crash was a complete game changer in terms of the way the conflict has been evolving over the past few months. So why not reverse the equation and come back to basics and start negotiating for real?
All right, come back to basics, start negotiating for real. A real game changer, well, up to a point. For his part, and remember, it's the Netherlands that lost the most citizens in that crash, the Dutch Prime Minister on Sunday ruling out sending a ground force to the area.
This option would be such a provocation to the separatists and would destabilize the situation. So we'd have to bring more than a massive military setup. It is a big geopolitical risk to get involved in the conflict close to the Russian border. This option is simply not realistic. So what we need to do now is continue to hold daily discussions about the best course of action.
All right, that's the statement from the Dutch Prime Minister. How is that statement going to be interpreted in Moscow?
Oh, for sure, Moscow will interpret it as a sign of weakness. I'm not saying that a European country and Netherlands should send troops there. Of course not.
Is Mark Rutte right that it would be a provocation and it would just inflame the situation even more?
I don't think there will. You don't need more provocations. There's already a full-scale war going on the ground, and you have heavy artillery and aviation. Everything is involved in this war, so you don't need more. The Russian forces do not need pro-Russian or Russian forces do not need more provocations to.
So you agree with
act.
the Dutch Prime Minister?
No, I would say yes. Yes and no. So partly it's too late somehow, because we should regret the fact that there was no European reaction and harsh reaction before, because before the occupation of the Crimea and annexation of the Crimea, and then after the occupation and annexation of Crimea, because it went more and more and farther coming from the Russian side. So maybe now we still have a possibility to be much more clear-cut and serious about the sanctions, and not only involving some persons, but also introducing some sectoral sanctions. That will be much more efficient than sending, I don't know, 50 or 60 or 100 policemen or Dutch military on the ground. Because it will not change the military situation. Ukrainians are trying to establish a control over this territory, and it's not just 100 or a few dozens of Dutch soldiers will not change the situation on the ground.
All right, before we go into the specifics of sanctions, let me at this point perhaps put it to you, James Kirchik. Do you agree with the statement that the downing of that plane has changed the equation?
No, I don't. I don't think it's pretty clear. We're seeing an increase of Russian soldiers on the border. We're seeing a continuation of arms and rockets being sent across the border. The leadership of the quote-unquote separatist movements are now being taken over by Russian citizens. So we're seeing an increase of Russian aggression against Ukraine. And I think, frankly, we could use some more provocations, if you want to use that word, from the West in response.
More provocations, if that's what you'd like to call them. The White House advisor has said in the past hour that there's evidence Russia is preparing to deliver more powerful rocket launchers to separatists in Ukraine. Now, over the weekend, the U.S. released fresh satellite imagery that claims shows missiles fired from Russia's Rostov province into Ukrainian territory. The Russian foreign minister staunchly denying the claim and inviting international monitors to help patrol the border.
In a telephone call to John Kerry yesterday, I asked him to ensure the deployment of the OSCE observers to those checkpoints. That would prevent the rumours that those checkpoints are being used to transport weapons and people from Russia to Ukraine. 2 weeks were lost because of the political games that were played by our Western and Ukrainian colleagues in the OSCE.
Let me ask you, James Kirchik, if one is a bit doubtful on sometimes evidence handed out by the State Department or the Pentagon, why should we believe this latest evidence?
Well, I'd just like to say to Mr. Lavrov, he was lying, and we know that because his lips were moving. Everything he's been saying for the past 5 months has been proven to be false. I think the only people who would doubt the information coming out implicating Russian involvement in downing this plane and in their continued sending of weapons are the Russians. I don't hear any serious people disputing the evidence.
I don't hear any serious people disputing the evidence, but when it comes to missiles fired from Russian soil, and you heard Lavrov say, let's bring in observers to monitor the border. Your thoughts on that?
I would support that, but I don't actually, when push comes to shove, I don't think the Russians will actually allow that to happen. I think we should take them up on their offer, but I would not be very optimistic that it would be accepted.
You don't believe that that offer would be accepted. Do you agree, Mathieu Boulet?
It has to be accepted. If we want to put Russia in front of its paradoxes and its truth, it has to be accepted. And Russia already offered some time ago to put together some kind of international peace monitoring team to protect the refugees, the influx of refugees from Ukraine to the Russian territory. Nothing was done, so now Russia is saying that there are too many refugees coming into the Russian territory. So now that there's another small open door, just go ahead and settle in.
Catherine Field?
Well, the OSCE has been ready to go into that border area for many weeks. So it's a little bit, if I may say, for Foreign Minister Lavrov, a little disingenuous to say, please send monitors to have a look. They've been standing around that area in the border now for months, wanting to go and have a look. This is just another, I wouldn't go so far as my colleague in Washington who says his lips are moving, therefore he's lying. But I think it's just another way of trying to get back into the game, look as though they're being, it's a test, and to look as though they're being an honest broker.
Yeah, I would add a few elements. Yes, we should accept this offer if this offer is serious, but it will take some time. It will not happen overnight. The Russians will have time to influence and to send even more weapons and people. And second, they will ask for something in exchange. And that would be probably something like creating a sanctuary or asking Ukrainian forces to stop the offensive that they are conducting in Donetsk and Lugansk regions, and to create a kind of Transnistria or de facto so-called operating states that would be entirely under Russian domination. That's something that they will probably ask the international community.
But would it be such a bad thing to have a ceasefire at this point in time?
I think that if the West accepts this proposal, so that guaranteeing the existence of these self-proclaimed de facto states that are entirely dominated by the people who are sent from Russia, that means that the conflict will stand for years and years. And we have excellent examples of that in Abkhazia, South Ossetia, and in Transnistria. So this is something that should be totally avoided.
So you're making the argument that we need effectively more fighting before we can have a deal?
No, we need a Western community of states and the US and Europe together to putting pressure on Russia, not on these people who are on Lugansk and Donetsk People Republic that do not represent anybody. It's just a very bizarre, I would say, creation. Put the pressure on Russians to stop support. And they will, without Russian support, these formations are not viable. They will dismantle very soon.
Mathieu Bouleg?
I completely agree. The eastern Ukraine is slowly becoming some kind of buffer zone, or buffer area, or a grey area where nothing will stand and no new government will be able to emerge and start negotiating. The more positions are entrenched, the more the anti-terrorist operations continue, the more war wages on, the less positions people will find, politically speaking, and try to sit at a negotiating table to find a compromise. There is no longer such a compromise possible at the moment. We're not even negotiating on this crisis solution. We're just doing damage control to see who is going to end up with the bigger slots at the end of the day. So yes, you have to force Russia into negotiating, but how can you do it when everything you do is helping Russia get even stronger on its positions? Accept Lavrov's offer to put together a team. It will be shown in Moscow as a sign of submission to Russia's volitions. So they've already won the game.
Are we not, though, locking both parties in for effectively a situation where neither one can back down, neither one can save face?
Well, it's been so since, say, the start of the Cold War, where every positions have been locked in and nothing has really changed that much. And there's a proxy war going on in Ukraine between the United States and Russia, and the EU blocked in between, sandwiched in between.
I would slightly disagree. There's maybe a proxy war from Russia's side, but I don't believe that Ukrainian government is a proxy of the United States or of the Europe. That's for sure. So yeah, there's a proxy war. Russia is, I would say, using these groups on the ground, but the Ukrainian government has no other choice than to reestablish its territorial integrity, because that will mean the beginning of the end of Ukraine if they accept, after the annexation of Crimea, another region escaping the sovereignty of the government, and it will not stop here. It will be just, and the next will be Dnipropetrovsk or Kharkiv or other regions. So this is something crucial for Ukrainians to reestablish control over their territory.
All right, but nonetheless, we're in a situation now, and I'll put it to you, James Kirchik, where the ante keeps being raised. The Russians feel more and more cornered, and as time goes on, there doesn't seem to be any hint of a discussion for a comprehensive political solution.
Well, you asked earlier, do we need more fighting? And I think we do. And I think up until this horrible tragedy 2 weeks ago, the Ukrainian government was actually making steady progress in its anti-terror operations and regaining territory that had been taken or occupied by Russian-backed separatists. And I think that they should be allowed to finish the job. As long as Russia is going to be supporting and arming and equipping separatists, quote unquote, and sending their men and material over the border, effectively waging war on the country of Ukraine, Ukraine should be allowed to defend itself and regain its territory. And I think a ceasefire imposed from outside by putative Western allies is not going to help anyone in the situation.
But we've seen in eastern Ukraine, James Kirchik, how the fighting has targeted civilians indiscriminately on both sides. In the case of the taking back of the city of Slavyansk, there were a lot of people killed. You are in a situation where there has been human rights groups chastising both sides for indiscriminate shelling.
Sure, and I don't, in no way do I condone human rights abuses committed by the Ukrainian government, but we have to look at the bigger picture here. This is a war being waged by a very large country which has a history of invading and subjugating and occupying its neighbors. And if there's anyone who knows how to kill civilians indiscriminately, it's the Russians.
Catherine Field, is it that clear cut? Because this kind of talk that we're having, does it just lead to further escalation?
We keep coming back to this question all the time. We keep saying, well, Putin has lost this round. What's he going to do now? Surely he's going to back off. Putin has lost every round of this game. He's lost his...
like when he annexed Crimea?
No, not that way. But you look at it, he wanted Ukraine to be within his sphere. He's lost that. He wanted Ukraine to be in his economic union. He lost that. He wanted Eastern Ukraine to be really in his domination. He's losing that. He still hasn't gone away. But it's something, it would be unfortunate if there was more fighting, because there is just so much fighting. And was it today, there's talk that the Red Cross have declared this to be a war. A war in Central Europe now, these days, this is outrageous. This is supposed to be a time of prosperity where we stand up for the values that Europe is actually based on.
When we come back, we're going to take a look at what Europe is deciding, and there's been some more statements this Monday out of European capitals on sanctions. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.